Hey everyone, it's JP from a couple of Dabblers here, talking to you today about the latest reveals from the Mantic Summer Preview as it pertains to Kings of War. What I'll be doing in the background as well is I'm actually painting a Kings of War model right here, and that's the Chroneas. So I'll just talk quickly about what I'm doing with the Chroneas right now. So this model, the Chroneas, is actually a resin model, and it's my first Mantic resin model that I've had experience with. And I have to say I'm really pleasantly surprised. Because in comparison, the only resin models I really have had any experience with are those from Games Workshop, those being the Finecast range nominally. And so obviously they're smaller, but they do always tend to come with a couple of problems that I've found. So I've never actually been satisfied with any models from the Finecast range, and I've got a few nominally from the Craftworld Eldar range, so this would be some of the Aspect Warriors and stuff. But anyway, they've always come with some problems, and I just dread getting those kinds of models. So when I got this Chroneas, I was dreading getting this too, but actually it came out of the box perfect. You know, there was nothing really wrong. You have to remove the little bits of flash off there, but otherwise it was perfectly fine. So what you see here, I've got it all spray painted up. It's primed with grey cere, so that's the Citadel primer that's normally used for the contrast paints. But today I won't be using a contrast paint. I'll be using something that just preceded the contrast paints, and that's the Hexwraith Technical Paint. And so what I'll be doing is applying that to the flames here, because the Chroneas is supposed to be a flaming gargantuan statue thing walking around hell, and obviously in my army all my demons have green fire, so I'm painting him to match. So he's going to have green fire to match the green fire of all my other demons that maybe they're throwing that fire or anything, but this guy's actually made of the fire. So I thought I would go with the same approach that I've done so far and use this technical paint. Now, what I'm actually doing right now is preparing for it. So I thought, well, this technical paint, you know, it lays down already a kind of a contrast, like the contrast paints, with lighter areas and darker areas as the paint settles around the contours. And so what I thought to do would be kind of to preempt that with a kind of loose kind of going highlight with white. So that's what I've got here. I've just got this white paint that I'm liberally applying. You know, at first I was being very careful, you know, just a little bit here and there, but I quickly abandoned that idea and just thought, no, just put it all on, because even once I put on the technical paint, you won't even notice so much the white anymore, because it's really just there to add an extra highlight on top of the grey cere, and I think it's already starting to look good. So anyway, with that out of the way, so this model, really enjoying it, and so I'll be painting it in the background, but I'll be swapping to some pictures as well. So what we had last Sunday was the Mantic Summer Preview, and so they actually talked about pretty much everything from their range, from, you know, the Kings of War Armada, which I might talk a little bit about because that does look pretty cool, but to obviously the Kings of War game itself. And so what they were revealing on that day were the Halflings. So Halflings have actually been around in Kings of War for a little while, in terms of they were part of the League of Rordia, which is a kind of a Kingdoms of Men theme list. And you could take Halfling units in that army, but there weren't actually any models for it. So where you got those models from was up to you. But as ever, I guess there must be lots of community drive for an actual Halfling force, because it's always been something that was kind of in the background in Warhammer Fantasy, but there never was actually a Halfling army. I know there were a couple of Halfling units and models that were produced, but nothing that actually you just take by itself a whole army. And so this is the first time I've ever seen a whole army be put on display, and really thought out beyond just standard Halflings. So what you're seeing here is essentially all the standard stuff you kind of expect. Well, kind of standard. So on the left there, you've got the Engineer. And so this already shows us that these Halflings aren't your standard boring, well, I wouldn't say boring, but, you know, your Tolkien-esque Halfling is a pretty simple kind of guy. You know, he enjoys his food, and pretty much everything he does in life is to get that food, you know. So, you know, they're multiple meals a day, they're 11sies, the second breakfasts, and then, you know, obviously it's a very agriculture based society, and so they're not really up for war. Whereas you can see already with this engineer, he's got a massive gun that's 1.5 times his height. There must be some other ideals that are going on in their society, and so this suggests that they're actually, as Mantic suggested, that this is reflecting the kind of the tinkerer nature of these halflings in the Mantic world in Panathor. And so what actually this reminds me of is World of Warcraft, in that they have gnomes. So gnomes, halflings are kind of similar. Gnomes are actually a lot smaller, at least in the game. But the gnomes were also real tinkerers. You know, they would actually, if you've ever played World of Warcraft, you would know that anything to do with gnomes is very mechanical. I mean, the mount that you could get in that game to ride around on to increase your movement speed was a mechanical chicken. So everything about them was very technically advanced. And so I think they've kind of gone in that direction. Not fully, obviously, there's no actual robots here, but you can definitely see that engineer has a considerably advanced gun. You know, it's a sniper rifle coupled with an elephant gun. Oh, it's probably a normal sniper rifle because he's not that big. But he's also got goggles, he's got tools, and so it really suggests to me that he is ready for business, and in the technological kind of way. So then we move on to the standard troops, as I refer to them. So that's these have got these spearmen here, and we've got the riflemen as well. And so they just look good. The spearmen look like little dudes that are punching above their weight, and the riflemen have got these big honking rifles so that they can actually do some damage at range. And I like the way they look. There's just lots of heads. You got diversity as well. You know, there's full kinds of representation. You got guys that are just walking around with their with their crazy mutton chops, hair, and and then you got and top hats even, and then you have others that are wearing full on battle helmets, and so it's really a motley crew of halflings coming together to fight. And so I think it's just a really cool look, and I'm really down for it. So. But then you go to the next level, and so this is where I was saying, this is all typical, but not really, because then the next thing is the actual cavalry, which is part of also the core kind of portion of the halflings, and so they are riding arrowlers. And so what's an arrowlers, you might say? It's, well, as you can see, it's some form of giant dog. This dog isn't probably all that giant, but it's giant enough that it's a mount for a halfling. So think a bulky kind of Great Dane. That's what this looks like. And so you've got this wonderful cavalry, the Arrowlers cavalry. They look great. They look fantastic. You got the dogs, some of them got armor. Well, actually, I think all of them have some form of armor or barding, which is good. You should protect your dog. And yeah, it's great. And then the cool thing that they said in this reveal is that actually those two troop that you saw before, so the spearmen, so the 10 spearmen there, 10 riflemen, and the 5 dogs, they're actually all from the same box. So that one box will contain sprues to make essentially 20 foot troops of whatever kind you like, and 5 mounted. So, and it all comes together. And so what that means is not only every time you buy them, you're getting everything, but you're also having this crazy amount of flexibility in the amount of options you have, because you can swap and change the top hat all over the place. Like, essentially, instead of having one kit for the cavalry and one kit for the troops, which would then have their own isolated parts, and so the cavalry one will have perhaps not as many heads to choose from, because ultimately you only need 5. But if you have a set that needs to contain a minimum 25 heads, and perhaps contains 40 on the sprue, that means you can get a lot of variety out of it. And so you'll be buying quite a few boxes and building a lot of these before you start coming up with replicates and getting a bit bored. So I think that's a really interesting concept, because I don't think I've ever seen any box, like not an army box, but any standard box, come with 2 kinds of vastly different troops, like cavalry versus troops, on foot troops. So yeah, it's an interesting idea, and I look forward to seeing other armies go in this kind of direction, but they might not, because I suspect that most of the reason why they're able to do this is that, well, the models are a little bit smaller. So by being smaller, you can fit more on a sprue. So I guess, you got to fill up the box with the sprues, the plastic, to get that value, and I don't mind that. That's okay, because Yeah, but it'd be cool if that happened with the goblins, but unfortunately that's not the case. And so then the last of this kind of more normal halfling kind of stuff is the sorcerer on Arales. So emphasis on the source part. Why? Because he's not your standard kind of sorcerer. He's not really. I mean, he's casting spells, but they're not the normal kind of spells. It's called gastromancy, which is a nice title for a school of magic based on food. And so apparently, what he's capable of doing is giving out auras. So he'll sit in between all your troops and be central, and you probably have a few of them peppered throughout your army, up to 3, and they'll be dispersing an aura essentially that will, improve your troops as auras tend to do. But I think it's definitely it's something beyond just your standard kind of inspiring aura that most characters give out. But it's buffs and combat buffs to speed and things like that. It'll be really interesting to see how this makes this army work, because overall what they said is that when people questioned, is there much difference between this and say goblins, so you're like, oh, is this just the neutral version of the goblins, because goblins already exist, they're small, they're numerous, but apparently the way that this army will work is not so much about sheer numbers, but rather the synergies between auras and troops and things like that, so that you can actually build up to a fighting force that essentially punches above their weight despite being smaller. Whereas goblins don't do that. You can't really improve the basic goblin much beyond what he's got. Obviously you could cast a Bane chant to increase his punching power, but ultimately a goblin's a goblin, and so what you do is you just get a lot of them and just drown your opponent in green. Whereas the halflings apparently is not going to be working that way. It's not going to be weight of numbers so much as making those numbers count by improving them. But then that is also what makes it a interesting army to play, because then you have to make sure that you can always do that, and your opponent will know this. They will know that this sorcerer is integral to your force. I guess being able to punch harder, and so they'll be going after them, and so it'll be all about essentially maintaining the synergies, protecting the sources of those synergies, and I think it's going to be a different kind of army, because it's one thing to protect your characters that give out inspiring, but if you lose them, your army can still fight just as well. It's just it can't take hits as well. It might rout. Whereas if you have this guy in there, he's putting out this aura that essentially just makes everything much better. And so I'm looking forward to fighting these on the tabletop. I know I've got a few friends that are all keen on getting into them, so I'll probably not get into them. My next army after these demons that you've seen a few of will be my goblins. I'll make a video about that actually really soon, just talking about getting into it and why I love Kings of War as well. But this is just talking about these new units they were showing. So this is the next stuff, and this is the wacky stuff. This is where it goes a bit next level, and I'm here for it. I like it. So what we're seeing here are some other kinds of units that have never been considered part of halflings in terms of the accepted halfling kind of mentality. And so right up the top here, you can see these grenadiers. That already is crazy. So I was talking about the technology stuff of the gnomes and how their technology. I think this is definitely gnome level technology. I actually forgot about them when I was talking before, saying, oh, they're not that much like gnomes. They actually are. So World of Warcraft gnomes, here they are with jetpacks, with their crazy wings that somehow help them glide and fly around, and a bunch of grenades and everything. So essentially you could probably put these in Warhammer 40,000 and they would look relatively at home. But I think it's pretty cool. They definitely look like they'll pack a punch, but yeah, I hope that they wouldn't be all that defensive, because, I mean, look at them. It is a flying little man, but they are wearing plate armor, so I wonder how much oomph is coming out of their jetpacks. We can't really see their jetpack around the back, so yeah, hopefully we can see some other views of these models soon. But already that's pretty cool, and so the idea apparently with the Grenadiers is that they provide what normally a small army does not get. When I say small, I mean in height. because when you're a bit smaller, you don't move as fast. And so one of the tricky things is, how do you get flanking charges? How do you get around? How do you harass the enemy, their war machines and their characters? Because if you can't move that fast, you'll never get there. They will just run away from you. And the answer is that you got grenadiers. You got these guys that can fly over and get into all the places your opponent doesn't want them. So that makes sense, and it's a cool way to bring in a kind of aerial flying units. They could have had them flying on, I don't know, Pegasus dogs, and I guess that would have been okay, but I think this is fine. We've got cool dogs already, giant dogs, and I think Grenadiers is a cool variation on, yes, that kind of tinkerer idea of what a halfling is. And so now moving kind of, not really tinkerer, just interesting friendships, and that's the forest troll gunners. And so, yeah, you can just see that you got these forest trolls, they've got these backpacks on, and they're willingly carrying halflings on these platforms who are armed with the long-range rifles that we've seen before. You know, these are really big guns, so it definitely looks like, as they described, this unit can hit you from afar, and then if you want to get in close, well, good luck, because you're fighting a troll. And if no one's familiar with trolls, they pack a punch, because they've usually got a higher crushing strength. They've got all kinds of defenses, regeneration and high defense and all that kind of stuff. So the fact that there's a little guy on top of its shoulders shooting as well just makes trolls better. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, the models look great. Like, look at these trolls. They look really awesome. They remind me of the Lord of the Rings troll. Well, actually, not Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit trolls. So they remind me of the trolls that were, arguing over who gets to eat the hobbits first, and the dwarves. And so I think these are perfect trolls. They look slightly more civilized than other trolls, and so I can see how halflings might be able to wrangle a friendship with them. I assume it's food based. Any kind of ally between troll and halfling definitely would be food based. It would be something along the lines of, well, you could eat me, but I can cook something better than me, which probably wouldn't work all the time if you're eating that stuff too. I assume the hobbit still tastes good. Anyway, moving away from that, then we finally have the harvester, and so this is where it all comes together: the tinkerer nature and the forest troll friendship, and an angry little halfling right in the back with the pitchfork, as if he's going to do anything. This is essentially the mincer, but but the lawnmower style. So the mincer I'm referring to is the goblin mincer, which is a great model by itself. I'm looking forward to getting some of those, but this is crazy. Like, look at it. It's it's some glorified lawnmower trolley thing with an added, I guess, shield in the way, full of spikes. Because, I mean, it's supposed to be a harvester that's used generally for harvesting, your wheats and the corn and all that kind of stuff. But you don't normally need a giant slab of steel with spikes sticking out of it to protect you from the corn. So I assume that was then added after, when they decided that this was going to be employed in battle. And fair enough, you don't want to get all that stuff in your eyes. For the forest troll, I mean. The halfling looks very far away from everything, so I'm not sure what he's hoping to achieve with that pitchfork, but, I respect his ability to try. I don't know why he didn't grab a gun, like the guys on the left, but here we are. So this is just, I assume, just a small part of the range, because, we've essentially, what we've seen here, we've seen, the troops, we've seen some of the leaders that you can choose from, the characters, the engineer and the sorcerer, and we've also got the grenadiers and the various employment opportunities for trolls, being the troll gunners and the harvesters, but we haven't seen some other characters. So I assume there'll be maybe some combat characters that can help at least moderately hold the line, and maybe some other forms of infantry, assassin characters. I don't know, or a grenadier character. Perhaps there is a character who is a grenadier himself, and so can fly over and get into all sorts of trouble, attack. You always need something that can help snipe out enemy characters. So and I don't think we've seen anything like artillery, and I don't know if there will be artillery of any kind, but I'm looking forward to see what comes next. So now back to my Chroneas that I've been painting here. So yeah, well, now you can see that I've put in the technical paint, and it's looking pretty good. Unfortunately, it seems like the way that this paint is settling, which I'll now show here, having dried it, It seems like it has settled not very well on the undersides of the flames, so if you flip it upside down you can actually see a couple of gaps, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do is reapply a bit more of the technical paint and leave it upside down in hopes that it will adhere to it. So what I've added here now is the Lamenter's yellow, and you can see that it's really warmed up the green fire that was coming off him. So that was with the glaze of Lamenter's yellow, and it has worked really well. I'm really happy with it. So now I'm on to the next step, and that is the very careful addition of black, because I want these guys to look like Warcraft Infernals. You know, essentially the burning rock guys that come from well, they're essentially demons. So I want to paint it like that, and so that's going to be taking some very careful addition of black. I didn't do it the other way around because I felt like I needed the white first, and maybe that was a bad idea, but here we are, and I'm going to be painting black, so wish me luck.